I'm Anita Gangi Balkun, and I have my home and studio in West Hartford, Connecticut. I am a practicing artist and a teacher at the Creek Arts Academy in Hartford. Well, a lot of the work from this show started with another installation that had to do with a moving pod. And so at that time I had decided to address the moving pod as that object that it is and started collecting all kinds of recycled packing materials. So that's where kind of the packing peanuts and the boxes and the cardboard started coming into my work. And then I just started scavenging other things because I got so much from that. And it related to a lot of my other work because I was using techniques that suggested textiles, and I have also a history of textiles in my background. So I think that's really, it was really the materials that kind of inspired it. My style of work relates to the spaces they inhabit. I often think about how can I activate the space, how can I make them really interesting to the viewer. I like elements of playfulness and definitely elements of interaction. I invite the viewers to touch the pieces and to add to them so that they become a part of it. They feel really connected in some way. So in terms of style, interactive installation, I guess. Also, history of assemblage, using the materials as they are. I really like to maintain the integrity of the materials, using them just as they are and manipulating them into some surprising form or some unusual form. So I guess that's where it falls. I can remember first seeing works by Sheila Hicks, and she's a fiber artist, an amazing fiber artist, and how powerful the very simple forms were, just using color and form, and how important texture was to her pieces, and I felt all that related to my work. So actually this piece here is really, really inspired by Sheila Hicks. I've seen several of her pieces where they were literally just spilling out of the ceiling, and I just thought, wow, it was just so cool. Contemporary artist Elena Herzog does work with found materials, and she constructs and then deconstructs with them, and she also works on the wall. And I actually had the chance to meet her personally and just have been really inspired by her work. Cornelia Parker, who works in the UK, again works with found objects that have deep histories related to them, and I think history and the journey also connects to my materials. So those would definitely be artists that I follow and I look at. Well, how long have I been doing this? Well, I'm trained as a painter. My background is in painting as an adult, I guess. As a youngster, I had a lot of textile background. And I think once I started working on my master's, those two things started to merge. I really wanted the textile sensibility and the painting sensibility to kind of merge together. So I still think I create, even though these have become more sculptural, I still think I create like a painter. I still think about composition and color and texture. The mark, what does that mark look like in space? So the sculptural work started a few years after I earned my master's. So that's been about 5 years, I guess. And the opportunity to really go larger installations came about 2 years ago when I was working with the Moving Pod and then working with Citywide Open Studios. Again, I had the chance to do a really big installation that I'd never been able to explore in my work before. So it's been fairly recent, just within a few years, working with the really large installation pieces. I really like the packing peanuts because when you see people's faces, when they see them, they're like really surprised and usually kind of joyful, like because they're so playful. And then when I tell them that they can touch them, they usually say, really, really? And then they just kind of run through them and, So, and even when I had them in the Moving Pod, which was a really enclosed space, it was so fun to just watch people's reaction to them. And again, being able to touch them, being able to go through them. In terms of complexity, I think embedded breath is probably my favorite because there's a lot of very detailed, fine work, concentrated work in that piece. It had developed from a large amount of stitching and printing and kind of fine work that there's many layers to that piece. So I think in terms of complexity, that's my favorite piece. The best thing about being an artist is being able to share it. I'm also a teacher, so I'm talking art all the time. And again, watching somebody that doesn't know that much about art or is wanting to learn about art and kind of seeing their delight when they can interact or learn more or practice their own voice, I think is the really special part about being an art. And also connecting to other artists, networking and meeting other artists, seeing how they inspire your work, and how your work inspires them, that continuous conversation between the artist and the viewer, the artist and another artist, it's all really great. The pay. The worst thing about being an artist is the pay. I have to say I work so many hours, really, really intensive work. And out of all these pieces here, there's only one that I've been compensated for. So the hard part is finding funding for your work, mostly funding for your time, and being compensated for your time. And I think that that's a continuous issue with artists, is they work really, really hard. We're very inventive, we're problem solvers, we bring new things to the world. You're creating something from nothing. And it has great value, yet the compensation usually isn't there financially. I'd say that's the hardest part. Another difficult thing in terms of installation work is finding venues. Not every gallery wants to see this hanging from their ceiling, probably because, somebody's not going to buy it and put it in their living room. But, so as an installation artist, those are probably two of the toughest issues. I don't ever really think about giving up. The challenges are there, and that's part of what I love about being an artist, is the problem solving. I don't think I could ever give up because it's just part of who I am. I'm always doing something. It doesn't ever go away. I'm always thinking about it, working on something at home, working on something in my studio. Teaching somebody else to work on some kind of project, whether it's in school or even outside of school. So it's just been a part of my whole life. So I don't think I ever give up. Mostly I work just to entertain myself. So if I find it really joyful and fun, then I'm just going to keep doing it. So, and that's the truth. I do work to entertain myself. Well, I think that one of the main objectives for my artwork is bringing something overlooked and bringing it into the light. Something that you might not think about or doesn't garner much attention. Obviously in this show, all of these materials would have ended up in a trash bin somewhere. So how interesting that here they are in this beautiful space, in this beautiful gallery, highlighted in a whole nother light, a whole nother viewpoint, giving perspective to things that are very commonplace. You know, I think that's the other interesting part of my work, is that they are things that you instantly recognize and connect to, and then yet you're surprised by them because of their form and their content. There's always, even though they're very playful, there's always an underlying content behind each one, and that keeps them complex and not just decorative and fun. There's always something driving the piece and the story behind it. So. I've always had kind of a pro and con to that, you know, the information on the side of the piece and how much information you really want to give people. I really like when people bring who they are and what their experiences are to the piece and interpret it on their own, because then a whole nother story evolves out of that piece that I may not have even seen in the making of it or in the preparing and installing of it. And that enriches my understanding of the piece, is when they bring more information and more insight and a different perspective. And then when I give them kind of the background and the story, then it enriches their perspective and insight. So I guess it, you know, kind of works both ways. Again, that kind of conversation and sharing of information really, I guess, really is what art is about. You know, that exchange between human beings, you know, between their experiences and connecting to their personal backgrounds. So I really enjoy when somebody else tells me what they've seen in a piece or what it reminds them of. The railing piece here is entitled Editorial Tapestry, and it was an installation specifically for the now vacant New Haven Register building, and it wrapped around the second floor railing and the room that was adjacent to the printing presses. And there were these huge dormant printing presses that were actually bright blue, hence the blue construction fencing. And the newspaper relates to the building's function at the time. And it was created as a tapestry with the reference to medieval tapestries that were intended to tell visual stories. So there's a rhythm and a pattern to the weaving. And then I invited viewers to actually add to the tapestry, so they were adding to the existing story with their own story, whatever they wanted to add to it. So you can see that these little writings here are additions of people who came and saw the installation and then wove right into it their own little piece of it. So they added to the history of the piece. When I created this piece, it had to be all bound up at the end, and I wanted to use poly strapping to do that, because I wanted to still use recycled materials that also related to the binding of bundles of newspaper. And when I needed those supplies, I went to the grocery store and asked the two grocers there to collect me some of the polystrapping, because I couldn't easily find a lot of it. And when I went back about 2 weeks later, they handed me these huge bags full of polystrapping, and I was very overwhelmed at their generosity. And I couldn't refuse such a gift. So the next piece that came out of all those straps is entitled Grocers Dilemma. And this is a weaving, again, out of all those multicolored straps that these two grocers from ShopRite gave to me and had collected for me. Kind of the reference to the aluminum foil references, again, the grocery experience and also the disposable experience of all the things that go through us as consumers that end up in the trash. So hence the antique scale and the kind of the foil creeping up through the piece. This ceiling hung piece is entitled Attic Avalanche. And again, it came from abundance and generosity of people that were donating materials to me. When I was finishing extra pieces for this section of the gallery with the packing peanuts, I put a call out onto UPcycled for more packing peanuts, and this gentleman offered me literally an attic full of packing peanuts. I'm not quite sure where they all came from or what they were doing in his attic. But again, it was really hard to resist. And so I crammed my car full of about 14 bags, literally garbage bags full of packing peanuts. And inspired by Sheila Hicks, this is kind of what evolved out of that piece. Lots and lots of threading. I've had two helpers do a little bit of the threading for me. And the garbage bags, again, kind of suggest the accumulation in his attic and the spilling out of the abundance. Okay, this wall piece comes from a previous installation with the moving pod that was entitled Self-Storage. So when I was first given the moving pod idea, I decided I didn't want to just address the inside of the moving pod, but also the outside, again, to surprise and engage the viewer immediately upon approaching the moving pod. So the whole outside of the moving pod, this large box, was covered with these gathered Afghans with the reference to the comforts of home and that everybody seems to own an Afghan, whether it was a gift that your grandmother made or your aunt made or it was a baby gift. Everybody seems to have one, and a lot of times it's kind of stored away and not used, or it's tucked under the bed or into the closet. But it does reference kind of one of the essential comforts of home. Everybody seems to have one. So these actually wrapped around the whole outside of the moving pod. So when you approached it, it was really colorful and fun and bright. And then on the inside, the walls of the moving pod were lined with bubble wrap. So everything was highly textural, inviting you to touch it. And again, suggesting the idea that when you walked into the moving pod, you were almost physically packed in there yourself. Everything was lined with bubble wrap, and all the packing peanuts were hanging from the ceiling. So this is basically kind of self-storage reconfigured for the space here at ArtWalk. Still inviting you to explore and touch the pieces, but they're just viewed in a little bit different way with the beautiful light coming through the windows. And this piece is entitled Songs in My Head, and it evolved from guitar strings from my son Steve's guitar shop. He is a musician and a luthier and builds and repairs guitars right in the basement of our home. And as he's working, he kind of would toss aside all the used strings from guitars that he's working on. And I was kind of fascinated by them and kind of gathered them up and brought them up to my studio and started playing with them. And they are literally just kind of woven together. There's nothing holding this together. There's no glue, no tape, no wire. It's literally one whole piece, and the tension between the strings and kind of the catch on them is holding them together. So I actually kind of imagine that, as he's working, this is kind of all the music that's kind of going through his head as he's repairing and fixing other people's guitars and thinking about his own music and his own work. This sculpture is entitled Embedded Breath, and it started with this antique lace piece that's stitched on the top here that's actually belonged to my husband's grandmother. And when I started researching what these crocheted pieces, the history of the crocheted pieces, I found out that they were actually intended as the yoke of a nightgown around the turn of the century. And so when I started to work on it, it's actually stitched to the paper that's suspended here. So I had the idea that I wanted them to merge together, hence the word embedded. So all the stitching is done in the places where the lace meets the rust. And the rust is there to suggest age and history, time. The lacing even suggests, the lacing of a bodice or a nightgown, or even a corset that had to be pulled tight. And then when I discovered that it was intended for a bed piece, of course I needed a bed. And by accident, literally driving down the boulevard in West Hartford, this bed was by the side of the road. Who could resist it? So I picked it up and into the back of my car. And then I had to figure out, how was I going to merge the two pieces? How was I going to merge the stitched piece with the bed piece? So I kind of had the idea that I wanted it to float above it, kind of be suspended. And these are actually old torn pillowcases. The clothespins reference kind of daily life and, domestic chores that kind of weigh you down and tie you to the earth. And also a little, chaos in there, hence their kind of active placement. And I think the thought behind this was often, in that space between sleeping and awake, there's kind of that space where you're not quite sure that you're asleep or are you dreaming. That seems to be a very creative time for me. Maybe because I've rested and my mind is a little bit clear and thoughts about my artwork and my creativity are kind of floating to the surface before all that daily activity interrupts it. And so I kind of consider this that kind of creative space between waking and sleeping. And, kind of that air and that breath that floats through us that allows us that freedom to create. So hence the name Embedded Breath. So this piece is called Day by Day, and I actually kind of consider it a gift because a really good friend of mine who does critique class with me gave me these boxes filled with cardboard pieces, and they came from her dad. Her dad has developed dementia, and he can no longer listen to the radio or watch TV because of his the impairities that he has. So his daily work has become tearing up cereal boxes and tissue boxes, boxes, from the pantry. And his daily work, as he sees it, is just, preparing them for the recycle bin. And so she brought them to me and asked would I like to create some art piece with them. And I was really touched by them because thinking about that his hands have handled every single piece that's in these boxes. And she had more. She only gave me 3 boxes, and she had many more that she was just throwing out. So I was really moved by them, and knowing a little bit about her dad, he was an engineer. So I felt that whatever I created had to be some kind of structure. So that kind of challenged me in a way, because the way that I built it took a certain amount of engineering in my own way. It kind of replicates the process of a repetitive process, and I think an abacus was kind of in my mind, counting days, counting moments. And so this whole thing, actually the way I built it, because I had to build the base to hold the abacus, let's call it that. The whole thing actually lifts out so that I can transport it, and so that it stands on its own, freely stands on its own, without really using anything else except the cardboard to support it. Except I guess how honored I am to be in this gallery. I've come here for years, always seeing how beautiful the space was, and you know, always wanting to be here. And wow, I can't, like, December's here and here I am. So I'm just so thrilled that even that they were so open to letting me experiment with the space, because I think this is pretty unusual for an ArtWalk show. So I appreciate their daring and bravery and kind of letting me do it. So thank you.